Are you happy with the outcome of the election?
They were able to build things that had not been precedented before. Get out of politics. You do not belong anywhere near politics. If you're going to go, the type of person that would be happy to get an invitation to a White House iftar, if you're the type of person that gets excited or happy, stay away from politics. Go do relief. Go do tahfeel. Do anything, but don't do politics because you're not built for it. For the record, hot take, I think we should have a complete moratorium on interfaith.
We talked about this on during lunch, but I think we should address it here too. Why'd you leave Twitter? He's already smiling.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Prophetic Mentality Podcast. I am your host, Amr Mabrouk, joined today by Imam Tom Facchine. That's the correct way to say it, right?
Yes.
Am I the best person who's ever said it?
No.
Oh. You did this, so I thought maybe
it was good. It was good.
Okay.
It was good.
First question I want to ask you is, are you happy with the outcome of the election?
Yeah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, sallallahu. Generally, yes. I mean, and we need to understand exactly what we mean when we say happy with the outcome. We're not happy with anybody dying or anybody being put in risk or anybody getting deported or anybody being oppressed or anybody being put fair. But we do understand that in the long arc of history, sometimes you have to suffer short-term consequences in order to get long-term gains. And so when we say we're quote-unquote happy, this is not to minimize the suffering that many of us, if not all of us, are about to receive, or our brothers and sisters, whether they're abroad, right? We're talking about in Palestine and Gaza or elsewhere, or at home, whether it's the African-American community, whether it's, our nonprofits, whether it's the Hispanic or the Latino community, right? This is not to minimize any of the suffering that comes ahead. But if you look at the Quran and you look at the way that history moves, sometimes you have to face something very, very scary and work through it. And that there's actually a sort of suffering that has to be endured strategically for a long-term benefit. And specifically, I believe, and I believe very strongly, that there's a very unique threat that Zionism poses to Muslims and to the whole apparatus of the United States of America, that it cuts across so many issues. The way in which Zionism and the Israeli government and Israeli interests have been able to capture the political machinery of the United States of America and the legal machinery and the academic machinery and all these different institutions to the point where our Constitution basically even becomes irrelevant. They don't want free speech. They don't want the freedom to assembly. They don't want freedom in academia. They don't want these things because that's how we keep them in check. And so they are pressing upon all of these different levers in order to stop any criticism of them. So this is like one of these issues, as some people would say, it's like, okay, well, this is a foreign policy. It's actually not a foreign policy issue.
It's very domestic.
It's very domestic consequences. Yeah. And it's a process issue that affects 100 other issues. That do we want to live in a country where every election is just sold to the highest bidder? Do we want to have a society in which any foreign government can come in and sling money around and sling influence around and then basically determine the outcome of these things? That is something that is a process point that affects immigration. It affects policing. It affects every issue that we're going to deal with, right? To say nothing of the way in which the IDF trains police officers in the United States of America, weaponizes the police, and militarizes the police. It's responsible for cop cities. The way that Israel is the playground of tech when it comes to military tech and when it comes to surveillance tech, and that comes home and affects us. And when we're surveilled as Muslims or as other parts of our identity. So there's a whole lot of things that the whole issue of Zionism and the Zionist project touches on that affects every single one of us in a very, very significant way. And the last thing I'll say on that is that when the main discourse that Zionism uses when it justifies its project, it's not, hey, we need money and support because we're fighting Arabs, or we need money and support because we're fighting brown people, or we need money and support because we're fighting secular nationalists. They come in and they say we need money and support because we're fighting Muslims, radical Islam. That's what they say. And that is something that endangers every single Muslim in a very, very fundamental way. So I see that as an extremely existential threat. I see it as a process threat. I see it as a threat that cuts across a ton of different issues. And so I see that as a really important point of intervention. Okay, that's a crucial point of intervention, that this is something that if we're able to rally and solve it, we're going to have a lot easier of a time solving our other issues as well. Now, the pushback on that will be, well, we have all these other issues. We have to also pursue them too. It's not right to turn our back on Sudan, or to turn our back on immigration issues, or to turn our back on whatever. We don't want to turn our back on anybody. But it's also true that some things happen sequentially. That sometimes you have to look for, if it's a 10-step process, what's step one? Or if these are dominoes that have to fall, right? Sudan, what's going on in Sudan is largely on the plate of the UAE. The UAE is in cahoots with Israel. If the UAE is allowed to normalize with Israel, that grants it political cover to do what it's doing. If you subtract US support for Israel from the equation, what does that do to Sudan?
It actually alleviates the situation, because now the UAE and Saudi Arabia will be less likely to normalize the relations, right? That's the whole thing.
Exactly. So these are the types of things. It's like, this is not throwing shade to anybody. It's not trying to minimize anybody else's issues. Yeah. And I could be wrong, and may Allah guide me if I'm wrong. But from what I see, that this is such a unique issue that is so broad in everything that it touches, that it deserves our attention, and it deserves our energy and our resources and our strategizing, as not the only issue that affects us, absolutely not, but the issue that if we are able to make a significant impact on it, it will actually change the terrain upon which everything else is fought and contested over as well, which will kind of hit a reset on our ability to pursue our other interests and our other causes.
In the beginning of your answer, you mentioned that maybe this is not a win that we're celebrating, but it's the first step into something else. And you mentioned suffering. Mm-hmm. So are you expecting that there will be some suffering with the Trump administration? Is this what you're saying? That
Of course. Life is suffering, man. It's like we sign up for suffering. You read the Quran, we sign up for suffering. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised us that we're going to suffer, that we're going to be tested with our bodies and our want money and our wealth and everything. And Baqarah and other surahs, Allah promised us, Al-Ankabut, did you think that you would be left to believe, or to say that you believe and not be tested or tried? The end of Surah At-Tawbah, at least once or twice a year, personally, collectively, we signed up for suffering. And that's not to say that, this is not like a pietistic or a quietistic argument, mm-hmm. that we just have to hum dhikr and just wait for the bala to pass over. No, that's not what we're saying. We have to struggle against it. That's our duty. That's what Allah expects us to do. حَتَّى يُمِيزَ الْخَبِيثَ مِنَ الطَّيِّبِ, so that He differentiates between the good and the bad, the pure and the rotten, the ones who are going to stand up for Allah's deen and what is true and what's right, and those who don't, right? But there's suffering involved in that. It's a path of suffering. Yeah. The path to struggle is a path of suffering. And so we have to set our expectations. And that's like part of the thing. Like some people, America, for some people, not for most people, but for some people, is a very luxurious place. It's a very comfortable place. And so sometimes that can lull you into a place of false security where you're not prepared to sacrifice or suffer. And then anybody even comes in and says a harmful word to you, and you're like, oh, this is a microaggression. This is terrible. This is like the worst thing. It's not the worst thing. Let's take it. We can take that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in Surah Al-Imran, about you're going to hear from the people of the book, adhan kathira, right? You're going to hear. They're going to speak nasty about you. They're going to do things to you. They're going to try to mess with you. This is part of the package. We can't turn away from it. We can't run away from it. We can't just be worried about our security and safety and comfort if it's first of all going to lead us to live in an undignified way. Second, it's going to set back what Allah wants us to do. And third, if it's going to endanger us long term. That's the thing. Many of these things have been metastasizing. The criminalization of being a Muslim has been metastasizing. It is advancing. It is not going anywhere. We're not going to actually be able to change it if we don't face it head on.
You think it's still difficult to be a Muslim in America?
I mean, we have a different scrutiny that's applied to us. I don't know if you call it whether it's difficult or not, but yeah, I mean, there's a different scrutiny. There's things that you and I can't say that could be construed for material support for terrorism, for example, that some lefty, person who's not a Muslim can stand up and say, and they're never going to see a jail cell about it.
Yeah, I mean, early on in the war on Gaza, the attacks on Gaza, what was going viral was the letter from Osama bin Laden, right? And that was all non-Muslims.
It was all non-Muslims. Imagine if that was you and me. Imagine if that was you and me.
They were sharing that, like, wait a second, are we controlled by an Israeli lobby? And they're having that conversation, and we're just kind of like, okay, like,
didn't have that on my bingo card, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was very, very interesting. No, yeah, I think you are right, and I think it's high time that we get comfortable being uncomfortable, which is part of our deen anyway, like part of that discipline, part of what we have to do. But yeah, living in America does give a little bit of a soft life. Everything is very easy, whether you're Muslim or not Muslim. Just you being able to live your life and acquire materialistic things.
Right. For the professional class, let's make that clear. For the professional classes.
For the professional class.
Like for the people who live in different area codes, it's a struggle. Right. We shouldn't lose sight of that too, because we do have Muslims. Maybe they're not front and center. Maybe they're not on the big stage, or they're not on YouTube. But in certain neighborhoods of certain places, I grew up 5 minutes from Camden, New Jersey. Right. Mm-hmm. It's like those places are rough. And life is a struggle.
Yeah.
Like day-to-day life is a struggle. So we don't want to minimize that. But yeah, it's like we have to be prepared for struggle. Everybody should be prepared for struggle, whether you live a materially comfortable life or not.
What do you think we should be doing now to kind of get ready for the incoming Trump administration? Is there anything specific? I mean, I feel like there was a lot of activism going on pre-election, and then after Trump declared victory, it's just kind of been crickets.
Yeah.
I know here now, and this weekend, it's the mass conference. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of great conversation, but is there something you can specifically add for our audience?
Sure. I mean, this is where the real
you
works.
are addressing mainly guys.
Yeah.
Right. So heads of household.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is where the real work starts, to be honest. Like the Prophet ﷺ, when he came to Medina, and one of the first things that the Ansar heard from him was talking about what's going to get you into Jannah. And one of the riwayah, he says, as-salatu wa nasu niyam, right? That you're praying when everybody else is sleeping. Okay. When you make an analogy from that, and the ulama I talked about when everybody else takes their foot off the gas, that's when you really get to work, because that's the most beneficial, and that's where you see the most gains. Right. Or like, some of the greats in basketball, for example, they would say, I forget it was LeBron and Kobe, I believe. Like LeBron used to say, every day I didn't feel like going to the gym. I knew that Kobe was in the gym. And so I used that as motivation to get my butt up off the ground and get into the gym. So now everybody's going back to Netflix and chill. Now's the time where we have to really work. Okay, what do? 2 years. We've got midterm elections. The midterm elections are very, very strategic for a lot of reasons. One, it's a lower bar to participate. It means you get a general election and everybody comes out to vote, or at least higher numbers. Midterm elections, only the people like 60 and up are usually voting, or the people that are following politics really, really closely. So that means that the barrier to success has been lowered. Okay, so that means that we need to develop the infrastructure and the strategic plan to taking advantage of that opportunity, among other opportunities. So how do you do that? One of the things that we absolutely need to do is we need to just start paying attention and mapping stuff. Like, we're too reactive in the Muslim community. And we've seen what reaction gets us. As the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That means that if you're able to intervene before it's too late, before it's actually a law or it's actually a policy or bombs actually start dropping, it's way easier than to stop it once it's already happening. So we need to go block by block and community by community and start mapping this out and getting organized. So I'm just going to share what we've started doing in Pennsylvania that I think can be a model for people going forward as well. Because our communities are mostly, inshallah, they're centered around mosques. A lot of people, they care about living close to the mosques. And so you have a lot of people living in the same district or the same ward or the same city as a mosque. So of every mosque, and a lot of mosques have started having their community engagement committees and stuff like that. Now, people's idea of what community engagement is unfortunately a little bit superficial. They think that it's just showing up, selfies, writing a letter, some sort of petitions. That's not networking. Yeah, mashallah. Yeah, this is not really, engagement is such a vague word that it's actually almost useless. We don't want engagement. We want power. Okay. So to have power and exercise power, you need to organize people to be able to act in concert, to get them to do the same thing at the same time. That's what power is. All those doctors we have, those employee doctors that don't have power because they have mortgages and they have credit card debt and they have student loan debt and they're not their own bosses, they're employees. Let's just say, even with that situation, if they were all to walk off the job at the same time, that's power. The hospital can't function without them. If just one of them walks off, easy, you make an example out of that guy or that woman, and then you throw the book at him, fire him, dox him, make sure that everybody else knows that that's going to happen to you if you do the same thing. Okay, what if 10 people do it? What if 20 people do it? What if 50 people do it? All of a sudden, then the hospital shuts down because it can't have those consequences come down on all those people. Okay, so that's power, getting multiple people, a critical mass of people to do the same thing at the same time. How do you do that? You need to organize a message that people can understand and believe in. You need to organize the people so that you know where people are and what are their positions that they hold and what leverage do they hold. You need to organize money in order to get the message out or to be able to coordinate, or let's say you need to spot somebody. Let's say those doctors, they fire them. Okay, who's going to pay for their salaries? Who's going to pay for their bills until the litigation comes or whatever it is, right? So there's steps that have to be taken in order to build this type of power. So every community needs to start paying attention. Where do people live? Do people even know where the people live in their own masjid? Which districts are we represented in? Which school systems are we represented in? Where do we have numbers? Where do we have workers? Like, what are our assets? You do the SWOT analysis, our strengths and our weaknesses, our opportunities and our threats. Who's in power? Who makes decisions? How do decisions get made? Right? We have like a spreadsheet. We have like a Google sheet, and it's got multiple pages on it. And the first page is just mapping out. There's like a 3x4 matrix. Local, county, state, federal. Executive, legislative, judicial. Who's in power? What are their names? What jurisdiction do they have? And what are they responsible for? You wouldn't complain to a representative about a road being unpaved. That's not a state or a federal issue. That's a local issue, right? And there's other things, when it comes to, and vice versa. So understanding who is where, understanding what they're responsible for. We started making profiles on people. Like, okay, here's who's in charge of this particular thing. Here's his deal. Here's her deal. This is what she ran on. Here's how she voted on these things. That requires you to articulate your issues. What are the issues that affect us as a Muslim community? Mm-hmm. Then you're going to have to prioritize between your issues because nobody's going to be for all of our issues. But this is the sort of work that it's going to take. We have a group. All we do is we meet online on Zoom once a week for an hour.
To talk about this.
To map it out. It's a working meeting.
Map it out. Yeah.
It's a working meeting. Okay? So I assign people, say, you're responsible for this cell. Go do research, come back and fill in the cell. You take this cell, you take this cell, you take this cell for this masjid community, for that masjid community, for that masjid community. Then we start paying attention to who's been elected recently, what are the term limits, how does the city government work, is it a council, what are the numbers that we have to marshal? How many people do we need to organize in order to put somebody in power? Which is a different question from how many people do we need to organize in order to swing an election? Because if you're looking at an election where there's only 500 votes that made a difference, you only need to organize 500 votes to be able to swing it one way or another. If you're looking at putting someone in power from scratch, you're probably looking at maybe some thousands of votes. Okay, but this is how you start paying attention. And once you start paying attention and mapping it out and studying the issue, you start seeing opportunities left and right. You start seeing opportunities. And some of them are electoral and some of them are not electoral. For example, we noticed one of the things, we have a high concentration of Muslims and Palestinians in one particular school district. everybody knows that every school has a cultural day, right? They let you, I don't know, set up a table in the cafeteria. You got your flag, you got, some treats, stuff like that, right? All right. We wanted to know, how did cultural day go? Was there any representation for Palestine? Despite being Palestinian families, they didn't have any representation for Palestine because it's on the students. It's on the students and the families to get their stuff together and apply and like whatever. You know who did have a table? Israel had a table. So there's a table for Israel and there's no table for Palestine. So we said, all right, we're going to gather together all the Palestinian families in the area and we're going to make together like a toolkit like that we're going to lend out. And we're going to make a spreadsheet, every school district where we have Palestinian families, and we're going to map every cultural day on the calendar. So we know when it's coming up. And then we're going to reach out. We're going to have like, here's the stuff. You go set up your cultural day here. Here's the stuff. You go set up your cultural day there. And then we're going to turn to the libraries. Be like, hey, libraries, are you doing anything for Nakba Day? Are you doing anything for this day? Do you have a cultural day? We've got a Palestinian installation with olives and Beit Atiq and all this other stuff, whatever. It's a good time. Some books. What books do you have on Palestine? Oh, you only have Zionist books. Well, we've got a list of books for you that we'd like to request that your library carry. You start to see opportunities everywhere. All right. There's always stuff going on in the news. A lot of people read local papers, or at least non-Muslims, older people, they read the local papers. Let's take 10 people and let's train them how to write op-eds, opinion pieces. And we'll commit to writing a certain amount of op-eds every quarter. There's always something happening in the news. Halab just got liberated early yesterday. Okay? That's an opportunity to write an op-ed. Okay? This is what's happening. This is whatever is, like the United States. And you come up with your messaging. Right? The students who are going to college and university. Do you know that if you start with a student paper by the time that you're a freshman, if you just stick around, you'll usually be like chief editor by the time you're a junior?
I had no idea.
Yeah, and that has immense power. You're shaping the way that things are talked about on campus. You have a platform. These are very easy, low-hanging fruit. When you start paying attention, the opportunities are everywhere. They're everywhere. We've got...
It just requires a lot of manpower and to be very you're very granular. Like you're really going into
1 hour a week. It only requires 1 hour a week.
And you're doing this for all of Pennsylvania?
No, I'm just doing this for Lehigh Valley right now. But we're going to make a template and then we're going to consult where we're going to show other people how to do it once we've kind of worked out some kinks and got a little more streamlined. Right? Sometimes I show up with a meeting with no agenda. I have no idea what I'm going to do. Then I take one look at the spreadsheet. I'm like, you know what? That's interesting. Let's look in on that. Like who can do a little bit more research on this thing? Like we learned, for example, that the mayor is up for election in 2025. So we learned that the mayor and the city council, they're on odd years so that they don't overlap with the congressional elections, which is really interesting because that makes the barrier even lower. So the vote turnout for the mayoral and the city council is even lower than for because it's an off year. So that's even better and works in our favor. Okay?
I don't know. Yeah, people don't usually vote.
Yeah, they don't.
The mayoral election is not something that's really talked about.
They don't. No one talks about it.
Maybe televised on local TV, but no one watches local TV.
No one. So these are like low hanging fruit, and it's like again, you go through the gears. Gear number 1 is just to be able to punish somebody. Somebody runs afoul. To be able to punish somebody, it's a first step. It's an important step though. Eventually, you want to get the numbers and you want to know. One of the other things we're going to do, so one of the first events that we're going to do, we decided we're going to try to do an event every quarter in the mosques, okay? Every event is going to have voter registration as part of it. That way, we're consistently throughout the year registering people to vote. We're not waiting for the election time where it's a panic and it's chaos. And we're going to take data of the people that we register to vote. So we know where they live. We know what ward they're in. We know what district they're in. And then we can actually keep track of how many people we registered to vote. And then if people are already registered, we can mark them down too. So at least we know what we're working with. So if you have somebody, you start to get a sense of how many votes you can actually deliver, which is extremely important when you start dealing with actual politicians and either saying that you're going to punish them or either approaching somebody. So next gear is approaching people to recruit them to run for things. And don't think that it has to just be Muslims. It doesn't. Sometimes it's better that it's not a Muslim. Sometimes you just need somebody who's amenable to your interests. And so if you're going to approach somebody, like just to give a high level example, we've got John Fetterman as a senator in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Nut job. He's been so unhinged that he's alienated a lot of people, even inside the Democratic Party. So there's a lot of Democrats who are below him in the House and below that are looking up and saying, I've got a career opportunity here. I can challenge this guy in a primary in 2028. Now, our strategic interest is doing the groundwork between now and 2026 that we can approach who we want, not like wait until it happens, not react after it's too late, but actually approach who we want and say, hey, you're pro-Palestine. You want to divest the state of Pennsylvania from Israeli bonds. You want this and that and that. But of course, you're a mixed bag. You also want this and that and that. If you shelve these 3 things we don't like and you keep these 3 things that we do like, we've got $1.5 million for you and we can deliver this many votes. Then the person actually, now you put them into power.
I mean, that is how AIPAC plays the game, right? It's not that every single person they back is Jewish or dual citizenship Israeli, right?
Absolutely not.
Majority are not.
The ones who are the staunchest defenders are the Lindsey Grahams.
Yeah.
Right?
So this, your segmentation, like how you saying you're going in and you're finding out all these little details and finding out when the mayoral elections are happening, kind of remind me of a local story that happened recently. Mm-hmm. There's a city here called Huntington Beach. They have like a city council. And recently they ratified something in the city. They had like a vote where their city became a sister city with another city in Israel.
Yeah.
Like very weird.
Yep.
Like what does your city, beach city here, have anything to do?
That's soft power. That's what the Zionists do as soft power in order to normalize. And I call this entanglement. Right. So Israel has an active policy of soft power via entanglement, where they consist like sister city programs and student exchange programs. Bro, when I was in San Diego in the spring, the University of California, San Diego has exchange programs in Israel that some of their students can't go to because they're Palestinian. That's crazy. Like, that is something that is just like absolutely.
And the fact that UCSD is actually a public school.
Yeah.
How is that allowed?
I don't even know, but in America,
that's crazy.
It is what it is until you stop it. And this is what Trump does, which is part of how he doesn't play politics the way normal politicians play. He does whatever he wants to do until someone forces him to stop. But that's how America works. Like, you do what you do until someone forces you to stop, but you have to pay attention. You have to get actively involved. So it is a block by block, community by community, city by city thing. Like, you have to, like, now is the time where we study the issue. And once you study the issue, you will notice the opportunities and you'll start to notice threats. And then you'll be able to prioritize between those opportunities and threats. Maybe you don't have the manpower, you don't have the money to do everything on your wish list. But if you're able to do 1 or 2 things on your wish list, then people start paying attention to you. And they're like, oh, okay. Like, now you change the behavior of political actors because they're anticipating that you have the power to do something. Whereas up until now, we haven't really demonstrated that we have the power to do very much. So this is something that anybody can do. Like my degree is in international relations and political theory. It's not in civics. It's not in local government and these sorts of things or constitutional law. So this is like, I'm not even an expert doing these things. So we just show up and we chip what we do, however much we can do in an hour. Say, all right, that was a good hour. See you guys next week. Right? And that's something anybody can do.
So this template will be rolling out. So
yeah,
anyone
absolutely.
else in their community can, and there's going to be like some sort of master list, hopefully. We can all get coordinated.
Yeah. No, there will be. There has to be. There has to be.
I mean, to me, this sounds like the beginnings of some sort of organization.
Yeah, it probably will be. And people ask me that. It's like, this is an org? Here's what I learned. Here's what I learned from Unity Lab, one of the best organizations to come out of the last year, based in Northern California. They were responsible for the billboards, right, in Hollywood and in Times Square for Gaza. And they ran the first television commercial for Gaza. And they ran the first radio commercial for Gaza. I think that this organization is fantastic. I would like to see them really, really get big, because part of what they did, they were very focused and very specific. They weren't going to do everything. They said, we're going to do these 1 or 2 things. We're going to do them really well. And they have 0 paid staff. It's just volunteers. So they demonstrated this is not like people think about it. Oh, how like it's a perception thing where you think that you have to have, a huge budget and huge inputs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
maybe one day.
We're talking about it offline about how there needs to be more new and fresh organizations that take on these challenges. The first thing that came in my mind, and I'm going to bring it up now, is funding.
Yeah.
It seems like the community is so strapped. Like, everything's always a fundraiser.
Yeah.
Right? Everything's always a nonprofit, so they need to fundraise. So when you said we need more organizations, the first thing that came to my mind was that just, we have to have more fundraising dinners. I don't know if the community wants to do that, right? But you're telling me that they did all this non-paid staff.
Non-paid staff, zero paid staff.
They were just focused.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the thing. It's like, yeah, I mean, you can reduce it on both ends. First of all, there is a lot of attention being paid, and I think a lot of Muslims are now seeing the need to splash money in the political sphere, though I would caution because a lot of people don't know what the strategic place to put their money is yet. But on the other side, there's so much you can do with a budget of zero. There is so much that you can do. I mean, social media is free.
Yeah, that's like Sami Hamdi's pitch.
Yeah,
right.
It is.
Share,
retweeting,
retweet.
like Bernie Sanders. Listen, one of the most significant movements in the last 10 years within U.S. electoral politics was the Bernie movement.
Feel the burn.
Feel the burn, man. $27 was the average donation of his campaign. That was what grassroots movement looks like. And grassroots, this is people what don't understand, especially you want to go up against AIPAC. Grassroots always wins against big money if they're organized. Look at Harris's campaign. Why did Harris's campaign fail?
I mean,
multiple reasons.
Have another podcast.
Multiple reasons. Like one of the worst campaigns we've ever seen.
They ran like a 2016 campaign.
Exactly.
Like we're in 2024.
But they had absolutely zero grassroots presence.
It was all big money.
It's all just big money, celebrities, influencers. They thought that they could just spend their way to the presidency. And you can't do that. Like, it's just fluff. It's all, none of it had any basis in reality. Nobody was out there diehard Harris fans. Not like Trump. Like, Trump has an actual base of people, that actually, believe in whatever they think he symbolizes to them. They didn't have that, right? So one of the many lessons is that, yes, money helps, but money definitely isn't everything.
Yeah. Do you think it's, when you say like, even appointing someone who's non-Muslim, right? And you're telling them, oh, we have $1.5 million for you, and there's 500 votes or whatever. This 1.5 million is coming from the community.
Yeah.
Is this something you think is going to go easy with Muslims when you find out that they're donating and then you're giving their money to a non-Muslim?
Yeah, I think so. Depending on the specifics of the situation. If you're talking about unseating someone like Fetterman, I think that's a pretty easy pitch. Now, I think that one of the things that we can do is to nationalize the fundraising and to sort of precision attack the implementation. So if I'm raising $1.5 million within Pennsylvania, maybe that's hard.
Yeah.
But if I go to Seattle, if I go to the Bay, if I go to LA, that 1.5, I know there's people that sneeze out $1.5 million.
True.
It's true, right?
I'm not one of them. But
You're not one of them. I'm not one of them, But those people exist.
Yeah.
Right? West Coast money, right? Yeah. So this is where we can actually sort of start to function as a national community, which we talk about, but we don't really have national community at this point.
Yeah.
Where a national community would look like, okay, our corporate power is in Dallas, and our big money and our tech is in West Coast, and our whatever is in the East Coast. And we actually function as a community where, well, we need to allocate some of that over here, over in Pennsylvania, because there's a very, very important race that's going on here, and there's another thing that's going on over here that needs our attention, and we prioritize top 5 list or whatever. So that's something that's very in range and within reach.
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet.
We're not.
When I compare ourselves to other communities seem to be very in tune,
right,
with what's going on everywhere, right? And they'll donate and they'll pay attention and they'll participate as if they're there.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you're telling me something's happening in Pennsylvania, I mean, I don't even know how I should start to begin to care. What does that mean? Like, What am I supposed to do? What's the mechanism with which I'm supposed to do something?
Yep.
So we're definitely, this is like an avenue. These are like freeways and highways that we still have to build.
Yep.
I think that actually goes part to like our tenets of faith, right? You're supposed to feel like the whole ummah is one body, right? When one piece hurts, you're supposed to feel it. So maybe it's a lack of iman as well, and a lack of our own religiosity that's manifesting this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that fascinates me about Islamic history is the administrative developments. I hesitate to use the word innovations by the Khulafa al-Rashidin, like especially Umar ibn al-Khattab when he was the Amir al-Mu'mineen. He had a lot of new ideas that he implemented in the administrative level. Like there were Sharia objectives that were guiding everything the whole time, and Sharia principles for how they needed to sort of look, but they were able to build things that had not been precedented before.
Yeah.
Vehicles, the highways, quote unquote, in order to deliver those things. So that's the level that we're at right now. We are going to build the vehicles. We have to build the highways, and that is something that if we notice a need, which is the lack of connectivity, people in silos, all across the board, then we need to reverse engineer that and to see what needs to exist to ameliorate those sorts of concerns.
Yeah, and I think we can do it. I mean, I was this past Friday, Sheikh Tariq Atta?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he gave the khutbah the masjid I was attending, and he said that, people like to say the Muslim community is weak, the ummah is weak, but he said one good thing that we don't realize is if there's a community that needs money to build a masjid, he doesn't know of a single community that wasn't able to come up with the money eventually.
Yeah, Allahu Akbar.
Right? So to some level, we do have that.
Yep.
Right?
No, it's true.
It's like, okay, we're going to build a house of Allah. We're going to do it. They go around all the different communities. They get their money eventually.
Yep.
And I may never go to that masjid. I've never met anyone from that community, but you're going to give.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just going to take a little bit more, I think, from our Muslim leadership to kind of coerce not coerce, that's a bad word.
Force, impose, threaten.
But it just needs to be presented in a way that's like, this is also very, very beneficial because you're building a house of Allah in this donation, and in this donation, you're alleviating suffering for Muslims.
And that's why we need the groups. I think that the actual organizations, the entities that are going to make the decisions about where to apply that money, I think that there needs to be a membrane there or a barrier, because you don't want the donors like calling the shots as to what you think everything needs to happen. We've seen that go afoul.
Yeah.
But if there's an organization such as Unity Lab that's a track record of like good work, smart work, intelligent work, that the ROI is enormous for the amount of money that they've put into their projects, and the amount of return they've gotten on them, it's like, then that's a pitch. And you go around raising for that pitch and just like imagine if we had X amount of money, what more we could do. And then they'll be the ones to say, it's like, well, let's put it here, let's put it over here. Here are our priorities and here's where we move.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those things can happen, right? And they already do happen to some extent. CARE goes around and they're a national level organization. They raise money for themselves. MASS is a national level organization.
Yeah. What
we really just need is a new era of organizations that are dedicated to this type of work, that is going to be a little bit more focused. No disrespect to CARE Action or
they have so much on their plate. It's very difficult to execute 100%.
You can't do everything.
Channels. You can't do everything.
You can't do everything.
So maybe like these upcoming organizations, and from whatever other organizations I've seen online from the opposition, you go to their About Us and it's like very hyper specific. Like, this is all you do.
Yeah. Yeah, and then imagine if you have
that's all you need to do.
Yeah,
right. And if you're good at it,
that's the whole thing. We need to do quality. Like we'd rather have a very insightful, deep impact on one particular goal, than sort of like piddle around in the in the sandbox with like 5 different things that we're trying to do.
Yeah,
right. Like we want impact, and we want impact as quick as possible.
Yeah, well, Unity Labs then is a very great case study for upcoming and emerging organizations and how they can operate. I mean, it seems like I didn't know that about their operations, but it seems very lean.
It's extremely lean. It's like surprising. It's like, wow.
Yeah. All right, let's see. We'll talk a little about Interfaith.
Oh boy, what's that?
So Interfaith has been took over our community a little bit post 9/11. I was one of those who was not a big fan of Interfaith. I thought it was useless. Seemed like this is just kumbaya, and I think I've been vindicated.
You've been 100% vindicated. Pat yourself. Go ahead, pat yourself on the back. You deserve it, man.
Actually, my father's the one who was kind of like, no, this is pointless, and we shouldn't be doing this. I'm like, no, Baba, it's a good idea. He's like, no, trust me. And he's right. So, thank you, Baba.
MashaAllah.
Alhamdulillah. But do you think, so I mean, you already kind of gave your answer.
I mean, interfaith was predicated on the idea that if we're likable enough and similar enough, then we'll get some sort of benefit or be safer or more secure. And we didn't realize that people were playing us. That the Zionists, especially the liberal Zionists, like, who were the people that wanted to do interfaith with us? And I ask like communities that if they're sort of hesitant to my critiques, which, by the way, like, for the record, hot take, I think we should have a complete moratorium on interfaith.
Whoa, all right, let's get into this.
Let's do this. A complete moratorium on interfaith until we develop very strict protocols and principles for what to get ourselves involved in and what not to get ourselves involved in. Because right now we're hemorrhaging on the interfaith front. People use us for credibility. They invite the imam to give just some sort of introductory dua, recite some ayat of Quran. You've got head Zionist rabbi Madriesh who's on stage, and then he can say, like, we're not against Muslims. Look, we had the Muslims here. That muddies the waters.
I text him all the time.
Yeah, I text him all the time. We have a good relationship. Yeah. It muddies the waters, and they use us, right? So this has to stop. So I definitely, and seeing the ghalib, seeing like the predominant application of this, it's not strategic whatsoever. Again, I say this with the whole allies conversation. I say this with the whole Biryani diplomacy conversation. What's the ROI?
What's Biryani diplomacy?
Biryani diplomacy is the twin of interfaith, but it's in electoral politics. It's the idea that let's invite the mayor or the local city councilor into the masjid, and let's let him speak on the minbar, and we have no idea what he's about to say, and let's give him biryani, and then he'll like us so much that he'll do something for us. How many times have you seen that work?
A few weeks ago.
Yeah, to work though. How many have you seen it work?
Oh, sorry, no, I've never seen it work.
Never seen it work.
No.
Because that's not how politics works. You are basically showing up with a huge sign to go to the politician like, I can be bought for cheap. That the cost of my allegiance is a smile. That is Biryani diplomacy. It's loyalty first politics. It doesn't work. Politics is about negotiation. It's about being able to deliver something or to withhold something from somebody.
You have to be a little abrasive.
You have to be a little bit abrasive, or at least you have to have a strong self-respect. I was saying in the recent podcast I did, if you're the type of person that gets happy inside of your heart when you take a selfie with a politician, get out of politics. You do not belong anywhere near politics. If you're going to go, the type of person that would be happy to get an invitation to a White House iftar.
Like the White House iftars. There needs to be a moratorium on Muslims accepting those.
100%. If you're the type of person that gets excited or happy, stay away from politics. Go do relief. Go do tahfidh. Do anything, but don't do politics because you're not built for it. Right? In fact, Sulaiman...
You're being used, actually.
You're being used. Sulaiman said when Bilqis tried to send him a gift, بَلْ أَنْتُمْ بِهَدِيَتِكُمْ تَفْرَحُونَ. You guys are happy with gifts. This is them. This is blame. Like, this is not a self-respecting attitude, and you're just going to get played. And in fact, you have gotten played. And they have used you for credibility. Now nobody can accuse them of being anti-Muslim or anti-Islam because you showed up at their event and they took selfies with you. And it looks like, it's PR. You gave them free PR and you extracted nothing from it.
You invite them to your iftar every year.
That's Biryani diplomacy.
That's Biryani diplomacy.
Okay, so that's the sister of interfaith. Yeah. Okay, where interfaith is this idea that we're going to show up. Now, again, I ask people, have you ever done quote unquote interfaith with ultra Orthodox Jews who think that Israel's haram in their Sharia? The answer is always no. Well, why haven't you? Have you ever reached out to Catholics who are anti-abortion? No, we haven't done that. Have you ever reached out to?
No, and I think that was a missed opportunity by the Muslim community. We could have been staunch on the abortion debate, but we weren't.
Right, and introduce nuance into it because we're not the same. Like, for the record, we're not the same as the Catholics when it comes to But my point is, look at who we have said yes to and who we've said no to.
Yes.
And what does that indicate about this whole interfaith thing? That it is the liberalization of Islam. It is the watering down of Islam. It is the being used by liberal Zionists, usually, and other groups to use us for credibility, to whitewash and to launder their butchery in this case, in the case of Zionism, in the case of Palestine.
Do I, as an individual, do I have the responsibility to speak out against other Muslim organizations when I see them whitewashing these kinds of things?
Maybe.
When I see them inviting certain speakers or, rubbing shoulders with specific individuals or having these
I think
smiley
you should.
selfies?
No, I think you should. And this is another part of, we have to get over this like secular cute Islam where the adab police, it's like, oh, you don't know what his intention was, oh, you don't know what was in his heart. No. Okay, maybe you can make an argument for not talking behind someone's back, but if you have the opportunity to go up to somebody and say, hey, why'd you do this? Are you like this was how the companions kept each other in check. If you actually look into the books of hadith, this is how they treated each other. When Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he heard someone reciting the Quran differently than him, he grabbed him by the neck and he drug him to the Prophet ﷺ and was ready to throw down. That and how many times have we seen that behavior from Umar? And we never once see the Prophet ﷺ correcting him for that behavior. We see clarification. He says, no, it was revealed like this and it was revealed like that. Or in the case of Hatib ibn Abi Bilta'a, with the letter that was tried to be smuggled into Mecca, he said, let him explain himself. He had a good intention. He fought at Badr. It's ma'fu inshallah. Right? But he never said to Umar, hey, you shouldn't react like that. You don't hold people, that's not the right way to hold people accountable. We miss this in the Muslim community right now. And so when you see somebody if you have the opportunity to make them feel the heat and make them feel the consequences of what they did, absolutely, I think that you should. That doesn't mean that I think that you should be a jerk or be belligerent, but listen, I mean, some of our sensibilities, they're really very, very like modernized and Western. We have examples in the books of hadith where I think it was it Ubadah ibn Samit or one of the other companions, I can't remember exactly who, but the Khatib was praising Muawiyah in the khutbah and he started picking up dirt and throwing it at him. And Muawiyah is about to freak out and he says, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ الْمَدَّاحِينَ, when you see the people who excessively praise you, throw dirt in their faces. And this is, at least 3 companions did this. Somebody would say, if that happened today, oh brother, this is not Islam, this is not adab, this is not how we behave. I don't know where we got this idea that Islam is just cuddly, but this was done out of tough love. I think that Islam has a place for tough love in between us. And this is not in contradiction to Allah saying that we are ruhama bainahum ashidda al kufar. No, this is not. But if you see your brother about to commit something that is going to harm him and the community and possibly his afterlife, what does it say about you that you let him persist and don't say anything? Right? It's like...
But do you care more about how you look or do you actually care about your brother? Because maybe if you cared about your brother, you would say something.
Exactly.
You care about his akhirah. You may hurt his feelings for his akhirah.
And you have to face the awkwardness of the confrontation. Like, we don't like to... I'm not I believe it or not, and we talked about this over lunch, I am actually not a confrontational person. I actually really find a confrontation uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But if I see dhulm, and Allah doesn't love illa man dhulim. الجهر بالسوء إلا من ظلم. Allah doesn't love that bad things or negative things be aired unless they are the people who have suffered from that.
Yeah.
So if you see it and we're suffering from it and you have the opportunity to directly confront the person responsible, absolutely. Look at what happened to the one imam in Washington, D.C. who showed up to the Interfaith iftar at the Israeli embassy or something like this. He led salah and he's seen like prostrating like in proximity to an Israeli flag. And the blow up was crazy, right?
That's very bad optics there.
Very bad optics. And he felt a lot of heat and he was like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Okay, inshallah, you didn't know. It was not a very believable excuse, but inshallah khair. But he's not going to make that mistake again. He received so much pushback that he's not going to make that same mistake again. And other imams that were caught taking pictures and selfies with ambassadors to the UN and all these problematic things, they need to feel pushback. This is not an awliya class, or a class of awliya. This is not people who are ma'soom. This is not people who, you just, he knows better what he's doing. No, this is Islam. It's Islam. If the companions were able to hold each other accountable, you have Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu giving a khutbah and a woman stands up and corrects him and she's right. You take it. You weren't with me, but it just happened to me at Mass. I was standing in line for coffee. The one sister was waiting for coffee and she's like, you totally forgot this. I didn't mention, Hispanic Muslims in my speech. And I'm in LA. I was like, you're right. Like, man, I feel bad about that. Like that was a complete oversight and I'm sorry. And you could tell she was like didn't expect me to just like it to be that easy.
She probably thought it was gonna be like a confrontation.
Right. But like we need that. Like I'm not a perfect person. Like I have oversights, I have mistakes. Like every single the problem is we say in the Muslim community, like, oh, everybody's a sinner, but we don't act like that. No, everybody's a sinner. You're a sinner. I'm a sinner. We have things. You have things. But when we see something public, okay, it's not the type of thing that's between you and Allah and like whatever. No, it's a public thing that's hurting the community. Then we have a duty.
Yeah,
we have a duty, and I believe it. So yeah, if you have the opportunity to turn up the heat on somebody, I think people need to feel the heat. I think that we're not doing a service to anybody to allow people to just continue in their whatever. And this is no going into any intentions or saying that people are munafiqeen or anything like that. It's just like what we said. Even the Prophet ﷺ, he said to some of the companions, you're not cut out for this or you're not cut out for that. He said to Abu Dhar, you're not suitable for leadership because he was too hard on people. He was a zahid. He held people to such a standard that it was almost like demoralizing. So he told him, you're not, you have a different role to play. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that.
So I should stand up at the khutbah and yell at the next M-gauge.
If it's M-gauge, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, thank you. If someone gives me pushback, I'll tell them Imam Tom gave me permission.
I was about to say no, but then he said M-gauge.
Yeah, they've recently set roots here in Southern California.
Yeah, I know.
So
I've got my mukhabarat everywhere. Don't worry. I already know. And the majlis and all the back and forth. I know.
Okay. You got your mukhabarat, huh?
Yeah.
We talked about this on during lunch, but I think we should address it here too. Why'd you leave Twitter? Or X?
What I noticed, so I noticed a couple things. One is the levels at which discourse happens. Okay. The true power is not the person who has no power is the person who makes the reaction video. Okay? Even if they have millions of views. The person who makes the reaction video has no power. Because you're reacting to what other people are saying. That means you're being driven by other forces that are beyond your control. And then you have an audience, so you're a performer. So you're performing to people's expectations. You develop a core audience over time. You feel the need to perform and to meet those expectations of the core audience. It's not very good for long-term strategic steering and change. Real power is being able to disseminate and deploy something that's going to change what people are talking about and even more importantly, how they're talking about it. That is where intervention really is. And so if you have a personal or a professional account, but it's you, right? And you are in the trenches and you're in the melee. Like social media is like a melee. Like there's all these different levels of people. There's bots out there. There's people who have fake accounts. There's real followers. There's fans. There's haters. There's influencers. Like all this mix. It's literally like a mosh pit.
Reverse mukhabarat. Yeah.
Is reverse. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, and this is how some people try to get into your head as well.
Yeah.
And you've seen a lot of mashayikh and du'at that their sense of clarity gets muddled by you don't even know what to pay attention to what's relevant anymore, right? Either you go on the side of you soak in the praise and you get big-headed, or you absorb all the criticism and you almost become like paranoid or bitter or just sort of thrown off of what is just. So there's a need to influence discourse, but keeping your hands clean and keeping your eyes clear. To be able to release things and you like drop it and then let the people talk about it. Let the people talk about it. But you don't need to be in the mosh pit or in the melee. Then you're moving on to the next thing and you're dropping the next thing. And then you're moving on to the next thing and you're dropping the next thing. And you're actually trying to steer how people are reacting to things. Like I see that as much more important and higher level than getting down the trenches. Not that there isn't a role for that. There is. But when I did the ROI of like, what am I putting my time into? And how many tweets do I have to scroll through to find something that's beneficial or something to respond to? Or how much time does it take to put together like a
tweet thread?
A tweet thread.
Yeah.
You know, like I had some nice tweet threads. I had one really nice one on perennialism and, you know, going through the whole Zaytuna crowd and the influence of perennialism on them and some others, but the ROI wasn't there, right? For all the things that it did, it was not the most efficient use of my time. And I feel the need to do something bigger and more systematic to affect the discourse in the long term. So within the next year, you're going to see a couple channels and initiatives that are going to pop up, inshallah ta'ala, that I am either solely behind or partially behind with other people that are going to attempt to move the discourse in a positive direction. And I think that that's not only is it a healthier way to interact with it, like on a personal level and a psychological level, but it's also a more strategic way to intervene in those spaces. Allah knows best.
So what you're saying is it was not the Dawa Mafia that came to you?
No, nobody gave me a call in the night.
No one called you in the middle of the night.
No, and my proof for that is that I kept on saying the same things just in person. I didn't change my tune. I didn't start talking about heart softeners and you know, this other stuff, or you know,
put that to bed then.
Yeah, I kept on saying the same stuff. It's just like I was doing it in person, and I was also, you know, trying to write more and trying to read more and trying to do different types of things. Like social media is a front, but it's not the only front.
I mean, it's especially Twitter. It can be a time suck, and it's not real life. And if you get convinced that it is real life, then you will have a very terrible time.
You see a lot of du'at that get thrown off, like their calibration gets thrown off because
they start they're talking to you, addressing the comments.
Exactly. And they're too online. There's such a thing as being too online.
100%. Yes.
You lose your sense of what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that I never wanted to happen to me. I wanted to be able to be more in control of my interventions than that.
Yeah. Are you okay addressing your paper or not yet?
Which one? Feminism?
The feminism
Oh,
paper.
let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Okay. So Imam Tom, over lunch he's already smiling. You mentioned that you have this behemoth of a paper.
Became a behemoth, yeah.
Of a paper that's about to come out. You know, my understanding is, and also my viewpoint is that the discourse on feminism has been ongoing. It's been like a war of attrition against them. They've been getting beaten down. But it seems like this is the nuclear bomb that you're about to drop. It's about to be totally over.
Well, the crazy thing was, man, we were talking about both of our histories, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, both of us being
self-proclaimed feminist after graduating college.
Yeah. Well, I was that was actually after high school for me. So I kind of went through the paces quicker. But well,
that's why you didn't you do a women's?
I took women's studies classes.
Studies?
Yeah, I took one women's studies class in college.
That's all you need.
That's all you need, man. And actually, the professors told me that I should make it my major. Yeah. So I've read bell hooks. I've read, you know, like Audre Lorde. It's like like I know this stuff, man, and that's the thing. Like I know this stuff. I know feminist theory. I know leftist theory. I know anarchist theory. I know Marxism. I know like this stuff I was a leftist, right? Like I know this stuff from the inside. By the way, and a thing I didn't get a chance to explore in this behemoth paper, which is now 50 pages plus, is the indebtedness of feminist theory to Marxism. So Engels has a book called something about like the history of family and property and stuff like that. And he basically, because they're materialists, they're atheists.
Yes.
Right. So they essentially take their same class analysis of the haves and have-nots, and they do the same thing with gender.
Yeah, gender.
Right. And like the males are a class of haves, and the women are the class of have-nots, and this is power, because rather than being a relationship of of duty or of mutual benefit or things like that, no, this is oppressor-oppressed relationship.
Yeah.
That whole framing actually comes from Marxism, which is kind of wild. A lot of people don't know. But I didn't even get a chance to get into that. But yeah, this is going to be a thorough deconstruction of feminism, both theoretical feminism and popular feminism. It's a cross section, so I had to obviously limit it because it's a huge topic. I had to limit it.
You only limit it to 50 pages.
Yeah, but honestly, it could be easily 150 pages, and I think I'm going to have to take. I'm at least going to have.
Maybe it can be a book.
I think it will be a book. The first thing I did was I wanted to address the general thrust of feminist theory and practice and the movement, but by focusing on 3 elements because the sort of cop out for a lot of feminists and for feminism is that, oh, well, the later waves of feminism kind of fix the problems of the earlier waves. Well, that hides what the waves have in common and the sort of metaphysics that undergird the entire thing, which is very materialistic, right? Structurally so. Like, yeah, later, cultural feminism and third world feminism, quote unquote, and post-colonial feminism, these different movements, they started caring about intersectionality and allowing some sort of, what I would say, a bit role or like token representation from different cultures who believe in God and believe in the divine and believe in these sorts of things, but not in such a structural way that really changed the episteme and the foundations of feminism.
It's still a materialistic,
atheistic worldview. Its idea of anthropology, of what is a human being and how they act and what motivates them, is very materialistic. And so I focus on three things in particular. I focus on autonomy, which is literally the opposite of Islam. I focus on patriarchy, right? Which that we have no reason in our deen to think that patriarchy is something that's inherently oppressive. Nothing. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they did nothing to overturn a supposed patriarchy. Now, misogyny existed and women's oppression existed. And one of the elisions that takes place is that feminism claims a monopoly for fighting against misogyny and women's oppression. And feminism, both theory and movement, attempt to take credit for everything that has done anything for women. Okay, so that's why you get claims that Islam is a feminist religion and the Prophet ﷺ was the world's first feminist, or these sorts of like outlandish claims.
Yeah, they retroactively try to find whatever was done that benefits them and say this person was acting in a feminist mode.
Exactly.
Ergo, he was a feminist the whole time.
Exactly, which is very anachronistic, first of all, and it's it's actually colonizing. Like, if we want to use lefty language, like, it's colonizing because
is it kufr?
It might be. I mean, it depends. Like, we have to. There's levels to it. There's levels to it. But the thing is that anthropologists define patriarchy as a society in which the males inherit, the name, and that male headship, something Mubin Vaid in his Substack has articulated as male headship, that males are given leadership roles in households and in society.
Yeah.
That women either are categorically excluded from or proportionally excluded from, depending on what is the exact role. And there's always exceptions, but exceptions don't prove rules. And so that was not overturned. That was not even seen as the cause to women's oppression and misogyny at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the revelation that came down. Allah didn't. If it were evil and if that were true, then it should have been overturned. It should have been overturned by Allah and by the Sharia. And it was not. It was allowed to perpetuate with important correctives, both structural correctives into what men were allowed to do, and also in tarbiyah correctives, in the general philosophy and the morality and the ethics of men and of all society. So the diagnosis was different. It was not the feminist diagnosis, right? Which is a Marxist diagnosis, which says that, oppressor oppressed, there's a relationship of power, haves and have-nots, and the reason why oppression exists is because there's a dominating class and there's an underclass. Like, that's the feminist diagnosis of the situation. Islam is a completely different diagnosis of misogyny and women's oppression. And then the prescriptive, right, what do you do about it, is completely different in Islam, right? Like, the Prophet ﷺ did not try to remove men structurally, systematically from leadership roles, right? He tried to, there were other things. There was internal and external mechanisms for accountability and for the maximalization of ethical action. And these things are not foolproof. And this is where reasoning has to be very tight here, because there's always a certain amount of abuse that can take place. That's life. But the existence of abuse does not necessitate the complete upending of the entire authority structure in the first place.
Yeah.
If that were true, then we would have no teachers, we would have no imams, we would have no authority of any type, because authority can always be abused. And there's nothing inherent in men that makes them abuse authority, right? This is part of where you get back to the philosophy and the philosophical sort of foundations of the movement, right? So I go into all this, but in reality, there needs to be probably at least three parts. One of the things that I was sort of I wanted to keep it to only dealing with like classical feminist theory and the general movement, which doesn't address the so-called Islamic feminists. But I think I'm going to have to go into it in a future paper as well, because some of the tricks that these scholars make are very disingenuous, and they're very insulting and displacing to the tradition of Islam. And they actually do war against the Sharia and the conceptual frameworks that the Sharia brought and instituted.
And it makes those Muslim women miserable. I mean, though a lot of those Muslim women end up without relationships, without children, and they're miserable. Like, is this really the road that you wanna go down?
Well, it's interesting because that's the third part of the paper focuses on representation, because a prescription, it's not as fundamental to feminism as patriarchy or autonomy, but one of the main prescriptions is representation.
What do you mean by like representation of the ideology?
No, a female representation across society. So if we have more female leaders, if we have more females represented in all parts of society, if the assumption is that men inherently oppress by being overrepresented or exclusively representing in a certain sort of leadership position, then one of the fixes, or maybe even the start of the solution, is to have equal representation for women across the board. So, at all levels. Does that make sense?
I understand.
Right. Okay. So this is really interesting, because there's an assumption here that women, if they're in a certain role, are going to behave in a certain way that represents women as a class and brings about certain benefits, tangible benefits to women as a class. Well, that becomes incoherent very quickly because women don't have a coherent set of interests that affects all of them. There are women that are pro-abortion and women that are against abortion in this country. There are women that prefer traditional marriage, and there's women that are trying to blow up the meaning of gender. They're all over the place, right? In addition to that, the problem of representation, is it so much that one type of identity is not being represented in a formal way, which leads us to a lot of tokenism usually, because now you've got Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris that are now yes queen, right, breaking the glass ceiling. And then women are saying, well, no, they don't actually represent us. It's like, well, why not? Like what metric do you have, or what, if representation is the game, then why don't they represent you? Well, they don't represent our values. Well, what are your values? Well, our values are this. Okay, but who said? You're a group of women that say that these are your values, but there are other women that say there are others. And you see that the coherence of the thing gets really sloppy and really, ambiguous very quickly, which is why with any identitarian intervention, there's no way to arbitrate at the end of the day between who really gets to represent you.
Because there's always another subset of another subset of another subset
exactly.
of more oppressed, or, so who's truly in charge?
This has parallels in the Palestinian movement as well. Like, so people, if you start speaking up in Palestine, but you're not Palestinian and they don't like your politics or they think you're too religious, they'll say, oh, you're not Palestinian. What are you doing? You shouldn't be taking up so much space. It's like, oh, so, you'll just bring Mahmoud Abbas in and I guess it's good, right? Right? It's like Mahmoud Abbas is Palestinian. Okay, like you want to bring a sellout in? Like, it's not like the whole idea about identitarian representation is very, very problematic. It's not about we have representation of skin and identities and these sorts of things, and it often gets us very, very little because it's very easily co-opted and it's very easily tokenized. What's much more important than representation of your identity is representation of your values.
Yes.
Okay, and that can be done with someone who is in your identity group or outside of your identity group. So then, does it become an issue of we don't have formal representation of our specific identity group? Or does it become an issue of individualism, where when men, maybe in a less individualistic age, would actually, when they made decisions, actually represented the interests of their womenfolk? Because every man was born to a woman, every man has a mother, most men have wives, most men have daughters, most men have sisters and aunts and these sorts of things. So is this a crisis of not the right type of identity in power, or not enough of them? Or is this a crisis of individualism where now people are only representing their individual interests, and they're being sort of cut off? They're not bringing that whole family with them into a decision or into their calculus.
Yeah, I mean, the traditional man or the traditional patriarch was in charge of the well-being of everybody.
And that's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ.
Yeah.
And he goes down the chain of command. And he starts with the king, and then he goes to the husband, the head of the household. And he is responsible for his family, all of it. And then he says, the spouse, the wife, is responsible for the children and her husband's house. Who does he exclude, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, from the responsibility? He excludes the husband from the wife's responsibility in the hadith. There's a chain of command there. Okay, now what this doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that there's no bidirectionality in that relationship. It's not all one way. The Prophet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. Right? Is that we are protectors of one another and allies of one another, but it's not the same sort of thing of what we're sold today.
Yeah, like we're not supposed to be allies, and I hate that term. But.
Yeah. Well, the allyship, إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Like this is a nice distinction that Imam Dawud Walid brings in his Towards Sacred Activism, where he says that allyship is really only for the believers. You can talk about coalition work. That's something different. But allyship is really only for the believers. I thought that was deep too.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah.
Kind of like letting that marinate a little bit.
Yeah. But anyway, it's at 51 pages right now. Inshallah, it should be published by the end of the year. And there's got to be at least 2 other segments. And it is what it is, man. I just, I'm not trying to trigger people. And let's be real. Like, women suffer from misogyny and from oppression. Like, my contention is that it's the diagnosis of what is responsible for that is not the same thing that feminism is saying is responsible for that.
Something that you said that I'm actually still trying to wrap my mind around right now is that are women suffering more because we live in an individualistic society, and the idea that men were supposed to be taking care of everybody in their family, but if the whole society is individualistic, then the man's just looking out for himself,
right? And everybody's poor,
and then everybody's worse off for it.
Everybody's worse off in an individualistic society. Everybody.
But the first 2 goes the women and the children.
Yeah.
And then the last 2 goes the man.
Yeah.
Whoa. I have a lot of people sit over here and we have a lot of different conversations. From finances to marriage is always do good, right? The numbers on marriage episodes. And it's always like, why are the guys like not doing what they're supposed to do? And I don't really have an answer. I just always try to talk to people about it. But I think this is the first time I'm really like landing on something right now. Is that when you live in this individualistic society, that whole structure breaks down. Yeah. Then you have guys asking their womenfolk for 50-50.
Right.
Right. Guys that are not, they're lazy. They're not out there working. They don't want to support their family. They're not being men.
Yeah, they're not. They're being individuals.
And what do I want right now? Play ice cream. I want to eat ice cream and play video games.
Yeah. Very selfish. Very materialistic. Very individualistic.
What's the solution to that, you think? Or not the solution to fix everything.
Yeah.
But there's got to be something we can do more in our communities to combat this.
Yeah, I think there is. Listen, most people aren't very intentional about the way that they live life. Most people, they just go along with what society's doing.
Okay.
I think that, the United States is fairly unique in that you have maybe a larger degree of freedom to, if you have the money and you have the organization, like you can make a lot of different changes. Okay. You can live in different ways if you actually just plan it out. So one of the things that, for example, like the Saudis did in Medina, they would own an apartment building and the whole extended family is in the apartment building, but each nuclear family is in a different unit in that building.
Yeah, okay. That's how actually I grew up.
Yeah, so there you go.
Yeah,
so,
in Egypt,
this is well known, right?
Yeah.
But how many times do you see that happen in America? A lot less.
Outside the Desi community?
Yeah.
Desi community is very good at, everyone kind of lives together. Other than that, not so much.
And when you make the decision to move away from home, away from your extended family, it's usually because a job, right? You get a job on the West Coast or the East Coast or whatever, and you go. It's considered socially appropriate to move away from family for a promotion or for a job. Whereas, maybe that's a sacrifice that shouldn't be made. Maybe there's something where we need more collective decision making rather than individualistic decision making.
And maybe that 20% isn't worth it. Because if you're living next to your parents, maybe you're splitting utility bills.
Yeah.
Less groceries, you're buying in bulk. One person cooks, the other person cooks. You're not going out to eat as often.
100%.
You don't need to pay for a babysitter.
Yep, absolutely.
You're not paying for a therapist because you're depressed and lonely. Because you're around family, right?
Yeah. No, and that's not to say that it's all a walk in the park. I mean, family can be toxic, quote unquote, or family can be, but the thing is that sometimes it's about expectations, because that is the set of people that Allah gave you in your life to accrue virtue through. Like your challenges of dealing with that racist uncle, right? Like the very individualistic and modern solution is just like, oh, well, he offended me. It's a microaggression. I'm cutting him off. I'm not, whatever. It's a very, very modern, very individualistic sort of balkanization, if you will, of how to live. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had uncles that disbelieved in him and fought against him. And you didn't see that level of there was bara'ah. Okay, we're not saying there's no loyalty and disavowal. That's part of our deen. But there was an understanding that there's community life and there's family life, and that's navigating through that and suffering through that sometimes. If it's not acute abuse, situations, we're not talking about those situations. We're talking about the normal day in and day out. That's an expected part of life.
And it's an expiation of sins.
A whole lot of things.
And it's a way to Allah, and it's...
Suffering has no purpose in the modern individual life.
No, the purpose of modern individual life is to alleviate suffering.
Maximize pleasure, minimize pain.
Yes.
Suffering is meaningless, and so it has to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah.
Whereas Islam teaches something different, that suffering is a means to virtue. Now, that doesn't mean that you allow your rights to be trampled on, or you just some sort of, martyr. And we're not talking about a literal martyr. We're talking about play the martyr, where you're just a doormat. That's not what we're saying. But
sometimes you have to have tough conversations.
Yeah.
You have to draw some boundaries, but you're still wishing to have family relations.
Yeah.
That's just what it is.
When the Prophet ﷺ was asked about Silat Rahim, about enjoining family ties, and the companion asked him, well, what if they cut off ties with me? And he said, that's Silat Rahim. He said, if you're only reciprocating, that's not valuable spiritually. You're just reciprocating. You're just not being a jerk. They're being nice to you, so you're being nice to them back. What's actually Silat Rahim is when someone is cutting you off and you keep on reaching out, right? So that's a whole paradigm of how to deal with people, and it's very, very different from how people are raised today. So I think that we have the ability, we just have to start paying attention and looking for these opportunities to move collectively, think collectively, live collectively, right? In less individualistic ways.
And I think the more we do that, the more we actually see some of our other organizational efforts materialize in a positive way.
Absolutely.
Because if it's not just me, but us, and it starts with you and your family, and you and your extended family, and now you and your community, and now you and your national community, then you really become an ummah.
Absolutely. And you become powerful. And this is when I think it was Yazid, I think there was a companion of the Prophet who approached, I think it was Yazid, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be mistaken. And the guard took exception because the way in which the companion approached him was very sort of aggressive and blaming him and like whatever. And so the guard was about to intervene, and whoever it was, Yazid or whoever, was like, hey, Lee, don't touch him. And he's like, this man, if you make him angry, 10,000 people are going to be angry on his behalf, and they're not going to ask why. That's power.
Wow.
Right?
I never heard of the story.
Yeah.
I got to look this one up. That's this was Yazid with...
There was a companion that was living at the time of Yazid, if I'm not mistaken,
okay,
who approached him to have some harsh words for him.
Oh, okay.
And I could be spacing on the name. I could be mixing it up, but yeah.
Okay. SubhanAllah. Okay, well, I think this is a great note to end it on. Jazakallah khair, Imam Tom, for joining the show. This is Amr Mabruk with the Prophetic Mentality Podcast, signing off. Assalamu alaikum.